Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seven Continents, One Story.
Hi there. So glad you're joining us today.
Hey everyone, great to have you here.
I'm Niels, professor of history from Sweden.
I'm Celine, joining you from Edinburgh, Scotland.
And I'm Ethan, calling in from Malta.
Together, we explore incredible stories from history across all 7 continents.
Every episode brings you a new journey through time.
From ancient civilizations to modern moments that changed everything.
So let's begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 7 Continents, One Story.
Hey, good to be here again.
How are you both doing today?
I'm excellent, Celine. Very excited about today's topic.
Me too, I've been reading about this one. It's going to be amazing.
Well, don't keep us in suspense. Where are we going today, Nils?
Celine, I'm glad you asked. Today we're traveling to central Mexico in the 15th century, and I've brought something extraordinary. Right, I have a challenge for both of you. 5 euros says you can't identify what I'm about to describe.
Ooh, I love these. Is it another artifact from your collection?
Not my personal collection this time, Ethan, but I saw the original in Mexico City, and it changed how I understood an entire civilization.
5 euros? You must be confident we won't guess it.
Let's see, are you ready?
Bring it on.
This object is massive. It weighs as much as 3 elephants, 25 tons of solid stone.
What? That's huge.
It's circular, 12 feet, that's about 3.7 meters across. And for over 300 years, it lay buried face down in the ground.
Buried? Why would someone bury something that size?
Because the people who buried it wanted to destroy the civilization that created it. In 1790, workers in Mexico City were repaving a plaza when their shovels struck something hard. They dug deeper, and they discovered...
Wait, 1790? That's like right after the American Revolution.
Exactly, Ethan. The world was changing everywhere. But what they found in Mexico changed how the world understood the Americas.
Can you give us another clue?
Patience. First, let me take you there. The year is 1428 CE. It's May. You're standing on the shore of Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico. The sun is brilliant overhead. The air smells of lake water and flowers. All around you, chinampas, floating gardens, stretch across the shallow waters, bursting with maize, beans, squash, tomatoes. Canoes glide between them, farmers tending their crops. In the middle of the lake, on 2 islands connected by causeways, rises a city. Tenochtitlan, white pyramids gleaming in the sun, thousands of buildings, markets filled with people. But this city, this beautiful city of perhaps 200,000 people, isn't an empire, not yet. It's a subject state, paying tribute to overlords, sending its young men to fight other people's wars, its nobility humiliated, its merchants constrained. But 3 men are about to change everything. An aging warrior with nothing to lose, a dispossessed prince with everything to prove, and a diplomat no one remembers. Together, they'll forge an empire that will dominate central Mexico for the next 90 years, an empire the Spanish will call the Aztecs.
That's beautiful, Nils. The way you describe it, I can almost see it.
Wait, so the Aztecs weren't always an empire? They started as like a subject state?
Excellent question, Ethan. That's exactly where our story begins. To understand what happens in 1428, we need to understand the Valley of Mexico in the early 15th century. The valley wasn't ruled by one power. It was divided amongst dozens of city-states, each with its own ruler, its own nobles, its own warriors.
So it's like a bunch of independent cities all competing with each other?
A bit like medieval Scotland, actually. We had clan territories, each with their own chiefs, constantly forming alliances and betraying each other.
Exactly, Celine. Very similar. The Nahuatl word is Altepetl. Each city-state controlled territory around it, had its own identity, its own patron gods. But for most of the 14th century, one power dominated them all, the Tepanec Empire.
Tepanec, not Aztec.
Not Aztec. Not yet. The Tepanecs, centered at a city called Azcapotzalco on the western shore of the lake, had conquered or intimidated most of the valley. They were ruled by a man named Tezozomach, who lived to be very old, perhaps 80 years. He ruled wisely, maintained alliances through marriages and gifts, kept the peace.
So what changed?
In 1426, Tezozomach died, and his son Maxtla seized power. Now, when Maxtla took control, several city-states had to decide whether to support him or resist. Tenochtitlan, the Mexica city in the middle of the lake, chose resistance. So did Texcoco to the east. And crucially, a smaller Tepanec city called Tlacopan joined them. Its leader, Totocuihuatzin, convinced many former Tepanec allies to switch sides.
Who's that?
Totocuihuatzin, the ruler of Tlacopan. We'll come back to him. He played a more important role than most people realize.
Okay, I need help understanding something. You said the Mexica city, but I thought we're talking about the Aztecs?
Brilliant question, Ethan. Let me explain. The people who lived in Tenochtitlan called themselves the Mexica. That's their name for themselves. Aztec is what historians call them later, named after their legendary homeland Aztlan. But they called themselves Mexica.
So Mexica is the proper name. Aztec is the historical term?
Exactly. For this episode, I'll use both, but remember they're the same people.
Got it. Mexica equals Aztec. They're in Tenochtitlan, paying tribute to the Tepanecs, and then Maxtla takes over and everything changes.
Perfect summary, Ethan.
I was reading about this last week in the library. What struck me was how brutal Maxtla was. His father, Tezozomoc, had ruled through diplomacy, but Maxtla ruled through terror.
Yes. Celine, what did you find?
Well, Maxtla didn't just take the throne, he usurped it from his brother Tlacaelel, who was the legitimate heir. Then Maxtla started assassinating rivals, including Chimalpopoca, the ruler of Tenochtitlan.
He murdered the leader of another city?
Yes, or forced him to commit suicide. The sources disagree on the exact method, but Chimalpopoca died at Maxtla's command. This created a crisis in Tenochtitlan. They needed a new leader, someone who could stand up to Maxtla.
Before we continue, Nils, can we have another clue about your mysterious object?
Of course. This stone is carved, 12 feet, about 3.7 meters in diameter, carved from a single piece of basalt. Originally, it was painted, bright blue, vivid red, green, and yellow. Imagine walking up to this massive disc, taller than two people, covered in brilliant colors and intricate symbols.
That sounds incredible.
At the center is a face with clawed hands. Each hand holds a human heart.
Oh, this is a religious object.
Among other things, yes. But what does it represent? Keep that question in mind. So, Tenochtitlan needs a new leader after Chimalpopoca's death. The nobles elect a man named Itzcoatl. Itzcoatl wasn't the obvious choice. He was born of the first ruler of Tenochtitlan and a Tepanec woman of lower status. This meant he had no automatic right to rule.
So they chose him even though he wasn't the heir?
They chose him because he was a warrior, experienced, decisive, and he had a plan.
What was the plan?
Itzcoatl sent messages to NA003, the rightful heir of Texcoco, who was living in exile because Maxtla had taken his throne. Itzcoatl proposed an alliance. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan would unite. Together, they'd attack Azcapotzalco and destroy the Tepanec Empire.
But wait, 3 cities against the entire Tepanec Empire? That's crazy.
It was, but they had no choice. Maxtla was tightening his grip. Soon he'd come for them all. Better to die fighting than to wait for death. Itzcoatl gathered the nobles of Tenochtitlan, the merchants, the warriors. He told them his plan: revolt against Maxtla, join with Texcoco and Tlacopan, fight for freedom.
How did they react?
They were terrified. These were people who'd lived under Tepanec rule their entire lives. They knew Maxtla was brutal. They knew the Tepanec army was huge. This rebellion could get them all killed.
So they didn't want to fight?
They wanted to fight, but they were afraid of losing everything. So they made Itzcoatl an offer. If the rebellion failed, the nobles agreed the commoners could enslave them, take their lands, even kill them. But if it succeeded, the nobles would rule forever.
They gambled their entire class structure on one battle?
They gambled everything. This is what fascinates me about this moment. The nobles literally put their lives on the line, not just as warriors, which was expected, but as a class. If they lost, they'd be destroyed utterly.
That's incredible commitment.
Itzcoatl sent envoys everywhere, to Usurpation, to Tlacaelel, to city-states that hated the Tepanecs. He promised them shares of the victory, shares of the tribute. By 1427, he'd assembled a coalition of perhaps 100,000 warriors.
100,000? How did they even feed an army that size?
Logistics. That's the part of history people forget. You can't just gather 100,000 men and expect them to fight. You need food, water, weapons, coordination.
Exactly, Celine. And this is where Nezahualcoyotl's brilliance showed. He wasn't just a warrior, he was an engineer, a strategist. He organized the supply lines, he positioned forces, and he did something very clever.
What?
He convinced Totocuihuatzin of Tlacopan to position his forces on the western side of Azcapotzalco. This blocked the escape route.
So they surrounded the city?
Completely. Tenochtitlan from the lake, Texcoco from the east, Tlacopan from the west, forces from Huexotzinco and Tlaxcala from the south. Azcapotzalco was trapped. The siege lasted 114 days.
That's like almost 4 months.
4 months of constant pressure. The coalition forces surrounded the city, cut off supply routes, launched attacks on the walls. Inside, Maxtla grew desperate. He sent insulting gifts to Itzcoatl, women's clothing, implying he was weak like a woman. This only strengthened Itzcoatl's resolve.
I came across something interesting about this siege. The sources say it lasted exactly 114 days, which feels very precise. Some scholars think that number might be symbolic rather than literal.
Excellent observation, Celine. You're right. Nahua culture loved numerical symbolism. 114 might represent something cosmological, or it might be accurate. We can't know for certain. But what we do know is that the siege was brutal.
Niels, before you continue, I really want to know what this stone is.
All right, your final clue. This stone contains 20 symbols. Each one represents a day of the Aztec month. Around those are 4 squares showing the 4 previous eras when the world was destroyed and recreated. And encircling everything are 2 fire serpents, their bodies covered in flames.
This is a calendar?
This is the Aztec Sunstone, also called the Calendar Stone, Piedra del Sol in Spanish. It's the most famous Aztec monument in existence. It represents the Aztec understanding of time, the cosmos, their place in the universe.
That's so cool, and it's been sitting in Mexico City this whole time?
In the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. I stood in front of it for an hour when I visited. This stone isn't just a calendar, it's a cosmological map. The face at the center is Tonatiuh, the sun god, or possibly Tlaltecuhtli, the earth god. Scholars debate this. The 4 squares around the face show the 4 previous suns, 4 previous eras when the world existed and was destroyed, by jaguars, by wind, by rain, by water. The Aztecs believed they lived in the 5th sun, the final era, which would end in earthquakes.
So they lived knowing their world could end at any moment?
Yes. This is why sacrifice was so important to them. They believed they had to feed the sun with blood to keep it alive, to keep the 5th sun from dying. This stone embodies that entire worldview. In 1428, after 114 days, the walls of Azcapotzalco were breached. Coalition forces poured into the city. Maxtla tried to escape. But remember, Totocuihuatzin had blocked the western route.
So Maxtla was trapped.
Trapped, captured, and sacrificed. His death marked the end of the Tepanec Empire and the beginning of the Aztec Empire.
So what happened after the victory? How did 3 cities share power?
They formalized an agreement, the Triple Alliance. All territory conquered, all tribute collected would be divided. 2/5 to Tenochtitlan, 2/5 to Texcoco, 1/5 to Tlacopan.
Wait, that's not equal. Tlacopan gets less?
Tlacopan was smaller, contributed fewer warriors, but that 1/5 was still enormous wealth. And here's what most people don't realize. Totocuihuatzin of Tlacopan was the bridge. He was Tepanec himself. His city had been part of Maxtla's empire. By joining the alliance, he convinced other Tepanec cities to switch sides peacefully.
So he prevented a civil war among the Tepanec people?
Exactly. Without Totocuihuatzin's diplomatic skill, the war might have dragged on for years. More battles, more deaths. But history doesn't remember him the way it remembers Itzcoatl and Nezahualcoyotl. His name appears briefly in the codices and then disappears. The Triple Alliance moved quickly. Within months, they conquered Coyoacan, Xochimilco, adjacent city-states that had supported the Tepanecs. They imposed tribute requirements: maize, beans, cotton, cacao, precious stones, feathers.
How did they collect all that?
The tribute system, right, Nels? Each conquered city had to send goods to the alliance.
Exactly. And this is where the empire became self-sustaining. The more they conquered, the more tribute they received. The more tribute they received, the more warriors they could support. The more warriors they supported, the more they could conquer. It was a cycle that had continued for 90 years.
Let me take us back to 1427. Itzcoatl has just been elected. He's proposing this alliance, this rebellion against Maxtla.
And the nobles of Tenochtitlan are terrified.
Because if they lose, they all die.
Worse than die. Enslaved, dishonored, their families destroyed, everything they've built over generations gone. So they have to decide, do they take this enormous risk?
Okay, put yourself in that room. You're a noble of Tenochtitlan in 1427. Itzcoatl is proposing rebellion against the Tepanec Empire. What would you do?
You've three choices. First, you could support Itzcoatl's plan, revolt, risk everything. Second, you could refuse, continue paying tribute, stay safe but subordinate. Third, you could try to negotiate better terms with Maxtla. Maybe he'll be reasonable.
Remember the context. Maxtla has already killed Chimalpopoca. He's brutal, unpredictable. He might kill you next, or he might ignore you if you stay quiet. You can't know.
I think I'd try negotiation first. Send envoys to Maxtla. Offer more tribute in exchange for guarantees of safety.
Rebellion is so risky. If you lose, everyone you love dies. That's too much to gamble.
But Celine, how do you negotiate with someone who murders his own brother? Maxtla took the throne by force. He killed the leader of your city. People like that don't negotiate. They take what they want. At some point, you have to stand up, even if it's scary.
Both of you make excellent points. Historically, we see examples of both strategies succeeding. Some cities survived by submitting, others survived by fighting. But there's a third factor: economics.
Economics?
Tenochtitlan was growing. Its merchants wanted to trade freely. Its warriors wanted glory and captured goods. Its farmers produced surplus crops from chinampas. Under Tepanec rule, all of that wealth flowed to Azcapotzalco. Tenochtitlan's growth was limited. So the merchants and warriors supported rebellion because economically, they'd more to gain than to lose.
So it wasn't just about freedom or safety, it was about economic opportunity?
Freedom, safety, economics, honor, revenge, all mixed together. This is what makes the decision so complex. Different groups in Tenochtitlan had different motivations.
So what would you do, really?
I still don't know. But I understand why they fought. When you're being crushed, sometimes fighting is the only option that lets you keep your dignity.
Here's what actually happened. The nobles agreed to support Itzcoatl's plan, but they attached a condition. If the rebellion failed, the commoners could enslave or kill the nobles, take their lands, destroy their families.
Wait, they agreed to be enslaved if they lost?
They created a commitment mechanism. By agreeing they could be enslaved, they ensured they'd fight with absolute determination. There'd be no retreat, no surrender, victory, or total destruction.
That's incredibly brave and incredibly desperate at the same time.
Yes, it shows how trapped they felt, how much they hated subordination to the Tepanecs. They chose freedom with the risk of death over safety with subordination. This decision created total commitment. Every noble knew that losing meant obliteration. So they fought harder than Maxtla's forces. They recruited more allies. They endured the siege. And when they won, the social structure they created, nobles ruling, commoners serving, became locked in place for the next 90 years.
So the gamble succeeded and it created the empire?
The gamble succeeded. The nobles kept their power. The commoners gained freedom from Tepanec tribute. The warriors gained glory and wealth. Everyone won. For a while. But remember Totocuihuatzin of Tlacopan? His role was more crucial than history recorded. When Itzcoatl and Nezahualcóyotl were building their coalition, they faced a problem. Many Tepanec cities were loyal to Azcapotzalco. If those cities fought for Maxtla, the rebellion would fail.
So they needed someone who could convince Tepanec cities to switch sides.
Exactly. Totocuihuatzin was Tepanec. His city Tlacopan had been part of the empire, but he recognized that Maxtla's brutality was destroying the Tepanec system his father Tezotzimach had built. So Totocuihuatzin went to other Tepanec cities and said, essentially, join us. Help us remove Maxtla. We'll share power fairly.
And they listened to him?
They did, because he was one of them. During the siege, Totocuihuatzin's forces blocked the western escape route from Azcapotzalco. This forced Maxtla to stay and fight rather than flee. Without that western blockade, Maxtla might have escaped, regrouped, and continued the war.
So Totocuihuatzin both prevented civil war among Tepanecs and ensured Maxtla couldn't escape?
Yes, but history barely remembers him. Itzcoatl gets the glory. Nezahualcoyotl becomes legendary. Totocuihuatzin is mentioned briefly and forgotten. We should remember him. Remember Totocuihuatzin of Tlacopan. Remember the name. The Triple Alliance of 1428 created an empire that would last until 1521, 93 years.
What happened in those 90 years?
Expansion, constant expansion. Under Itzcoatl and his successors, Moctezuma I, Itzcoatl, Itzcoatl, and finally Moctezuma II, the empire grew to control territory from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. They conquered the Mixtecs, the Zapotecs, city-states all the way to modern Guatemala.
So they became this huge empire really fast?
Within a generation. The tribute system fueled expansion. Each conquest brought more wealth, which supported more warriors, which enabled more conquests. At its peak, the empire collected tribute from perhaps 5 million people. But Itzcoatl did something else, something that shaped the empire's character. He appointed a man named Tlacaelel as his chief advisor. Tlacaelel reformed Mexica religion and ideology.
How?
Tlacaelel elevated Huitzilopochtli, the Mexica tribal god, to supreme position. He declared that the Mexica were the chosen people of the sun god. Their purpose was to feed the sun with sacrificial blood to prevent the fifth sun from dying, to prevent the world from ending in earthquakes.
So human sacrifice became central to their religion?
It was always part of Mesoamerican religion. Many cultures practiced it. But Tlacaelel intensified it, made it ideological justification for constant warfare. The Flower Wars, Xochitl, ritualized battles fought specifically to capture enemies for sacrifice, began or expanded during this period.
So conquest wasn't just about tribute, it was religious duty?
Conquest, tribute, sacrifice, religion, power, all intertwined. The same ideology that united the Mexica and justified their empire also created resentment among subject peoples. This would matter later.
There's something about this story that feels timeless, a small power uniting with others to overthrow a larger oppressor. We see that pattern throughout history.
Yeah, like in modern times you see smaller countries forming alliances against bigger threats. NATO, the European Union, ASEAN, in Asia, all alliances of smaller powers working together.
Excellent examples, Ethan. The Triple Alliance shows that coalition-building strategic partnerships can overcome superior force, but it also shows the dangers of rapid expansion fueled by tribute and ideology.
Because eventually, the empire became what it fought against, a dominant power extracting tribute from subject peoples.
Exactly. And when the Spanish arrived in 1519 under Hernán Cortés, many of those subject peoples allied with the Spanish against the Aztecs. History repeated, a coalition of smaller powers overthrowing a dominant empire.
Niels, can you share some surprising facts about the Aztecs, things people don't usually know?
Absolutely. First, the Aztec sunstone was originally painted in brilliant colors, bright blue, red, green, yellow. When you see it today in the museum, it's gray basalt. But imagine it covered in vibrant paint. It would have been absolutely stunning.
Here's something I found fascinating. Itzcoatl supposedly ordered the burning of historical codices, painted books, from before the Tepanec conquest. He wanted to create a unified official history that glorified the Mexica and erased alternative narratives.
Yes, this is attributed to Itzcoatl and Tlacaelel. They essentially rewrote history to support their political agenda. Though we should note that not all scholars agree this actually happened. The sources come from after the Spanish conquest and might be exaggerated.
So they did like propaganda?
Very sophisticated propaganda, creating a founding mythology that justified Mexico's supremacy and divine mission. Every empire does this to some degree, but the Aztecs were particularly systematic about it.
What happened to the Sunstone after the Spanish conquered Mexico?
The Spanish tried to destroy Aztec monuments because they were associated with paganism. The Sunstone was buried face down in the Zocalo, the main square of Mexico City, where it remained for over 300 years. In 1790, during renovations, workers discovered it by accident.
And now it's in a museum?
In the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, it's become a symbol of Mexican national identity. You see it everywhere, on coins, in art, and popular culture. A monument created to glorify Aztec power now represents Mexican pride and indigenous heritage. So, what have we learned today?
We've learned how 3 city-states, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacaelel, formed an alliance in 1427 to overthrow the Tepanec Empire.
We've learned about the massive gamble the Mexican nobles took. They agreed to be enslaved if they lost. That's incredible commitment.
We've learned about the Aztec Sunstone, the most famous Aztec monument, which encodes their understanding of cosmic time and the 5 suns.
And we've learned that even small powers, when they unite strategically, can overcome much larger empires.
But most importantly, we've learned about Totocuihuatzin of Tlacopan, a Tepanec ruler who chose to join the rebellion against his own people's empire, who convinced other Tepanec cities to switch sides peacefully, who positioned his forces to block Maxtla's escape during the Siege of Azcapotzalco.
Without him, the war might have turned into a civil war among Tepanecs. More bloodshed, more destruction.
And history barely remembers him.
That ends today. Remember Totocuihuatzin of Tlacopan. Remember his diplomatic skill. Remember his strategic positioning. Remember how he made the Triple Alliance truly triple, not just an alliance between Tenochtitlan and Texcoco. Remember Totocuihuatzin. Remember the name.
What strikes me about this story is how much courage it took. Not just physical courage in battle, but moral courage to risk everything for freedom.
And how quickly things can change. One decision in 1427 created an empire that lasted 90 years and changed millions of lives.
This is what history teaches us. Empires rise, empires fall, but the human capacity for courage, for forming alliances, for standing up against oppression, that remains constant across time and culture.
Hey, what did you think about this story? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
And if you don't want to miss any episodes, make sure to follow us or subscribe.
You can also sign up for our email newsletter to stay updated with all our latest episodes.
We're already preparing a new, very interesting episode for you.
Maybe a story from South America or Africa? We haven't decided yet.
Wherever history takes us.
That's the beauty of 7 continents, 1 story.
Until our next journey through time, keep history alive.